Well, continuing on with this hood here, I just thought I'd show you this little detail. You won't be able to see this very well once it's mounted on the hood because it's underneath the power bulge. But this is the little return lip I was talking about, bending up on this piece of sheet metal that creates a little floor in the outlet. And eventually the two little sidewalls will be welded up solid around here so that any infiltrating water should hit this and roll back out onto the hood, hopefully. Anyway, wanted to show you that before it disappears. Well, that's one of these pieces done. It's a real hassle to do this type of a shape for a number of reasons. I mean, it's sweeping around in a curve. It's going over in an arc. It has to be swept up in this direction, and as you know, if you roll a piece of metal, try to bend it around in this direction, that's not going to work too good. So you've got to continuously wheel it to stretch the material in the center. Then you have to take this and you have to stretch this out and spread these ends on both sides, slowly working it into the position, kind of working blind as to where all your edges have to eventually land. And you also have to this has a double feature here. It has this top edge over here, but you have to allow for enough to go back down on the back side to create what will eventually be your pinch flange over here to flange underneath your substructure. So all of this has to be done and worked in the anticipation that you're going to have enough material left on the top, and you don't want to leave too much material because then it makes this whole thing difficult to shape. You know, you're going back and forth and you have a lot of extra material. You're wasting a lot of time on those faraway edges that'll eventually get cut away. So you want to get it as small as you can, but you don't want to cut yourself short, because as you develop this piece, it changes shape, and what you thought you might have had plenty of material, suddenly as it starts to go around the curve, one of these edges might trail off to nothing. So it's kind of a hunt and a peck and a hunt and a peck, back and forth, both stretching these edges and then wheeling and trying to keep this thing averaged out as you go, and then getting it to go over the arc in addition to going around this curve here. So it's a bit of a bear, but anyway, that piece is done. So I'll go move on to this piece here. This is just a pattern, quick pattern, and I want to work it in just like I worked this one in here. So I want this to go in, but it's going to have to come in from here and blend into this curved area here. So it's got to run a little bit up onto this area here. That's why I had to develop this piece first. Okay, so I developed these little pieces here to blend out the areas where this notch is for this vent. And this is version 2. Version 1 didn't quite look right. It came too far in this direction here. It didn't sweep in as much as the rendering of this looks like. Now, I wasn't able to match the rendering 100% because of the fact that my hood bulge, by the time you get the substructure in, the thickness of it, in order for it to be at all effective, it had to be high all the way out to this point. Now, on the rendering, it blends down to 0 right about here on the hood, and I carried mine all the way out to the very edge, just because this is so high already. It would be really abrupt to come down and blend here, and then of course it wouldn't really blend. So the blend line would be way back here in order for it to look gentle enough to blend into the flat of this hood in the front as it does in the rendering, which would make these pretty much ineffective by the time you make the return flanges, you have the understructure and all that stuff. So with that in mind, I kind of did an abbreviated version, but it looked pretty awful. I cut them away and replaced them with ones that blended out further, which, like I said, is a little bit more reflective of the original rendering here. It's kind of hard to see here. It looks like just a shadow, but you can see this hood bulge drops down pretty quickly, and like I said, in order for mine to be effective, I had to build it up a little higher. So I'm kind of making a little practical choice there to put these in the way I did. Anyway, this one here is developed out. This will all these transitions will be smoothed out, of course, when I do the body work on here. I try to get as much of the sweep as I could with the metal itself, but these will just be softened up on these inner edges here. But it's a little odd looking maybe right now because it's all pieced together, but I think once it's all blended out in with the body work, I think it'll flow very nicely. Okay, so that completes most of the metal work for the top of the skin. Now the next stage is I've got to get make the grills for the openings and get that all finalized before I can take the hood off and finish working on the inner structure before I can put these two halves together. So that'll be the next step, but I just laid out these yellow pieces of tape on either side to give you an idea what the graphics, how the graphics are going to come off of that hood relative to those two openings, and how that's all going to line up here, what that kind of looks like there. Anyway, problem with this camera is the wide-angle lens. You can't really see what I'm seeing here unless I get really far back, and then you can see how this thing actually looks. The closer I get, the more distorted this car looks, but either way, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out, and I'll move on to the next thing. Okay, I'm going to try and get you in a little close here to see what I'm doing here. Now, I went ahead and I put some tape, some masking tape over the steel that's behind this grill, so that I'm about to pour some epoxy into these pockets here where I've placed some they're 1024 button heads, which I've flattened them off on the top and bottom side here so that they basically will fit snugly into this honeycomb. So now I've already done this with a test piece and it worked pretty good, so I'm going to pull this up off the surface just a little bit. I've got these both wound through the bottom of the hood here. Here's the one on that side, and then there's one on that side over there. Anyway, so what I've done is I've taped this up. This is flushed up now, has the top piece on it, so it's positioned where it needs to go. And I'm going to pour some epoxy in these two pockets, and that'll basically capture the two studs that I need to place this thing in, and put some nuts on the back side, some nylocks on the back side to secure it when it's all done. Anyway, I had to do that before I do my face because it's obviously behind the face. I wouldn't have access to locating the holes if I went ahead and put the face on first. Okay, now that it's dried up, I pulled it off, and I can show you what I've got here. And you can see I just sanded off the little bit of overfill in the front, and that's what it looks like on the back. As far as the studs are concerned, I need a longer stud on this side because there's substructure that's back here set off a little ways, and over here is just sheet metal. So what will happen is these will just fit into these holes when this is done, and then you'll be able to put a lock nut on the back side there and hold the piece in place. Now I've got to make the face piece for this. Anyway, that's where I'm going with that. Okay, the first step in making the faceplate for this grill is I traced out the perimeter of the existing grill, and what I'm going to do here is, this is the size of the opening, which is about 1/4 inch off the top and to the bottom, and 2 inches off of either side in order to hide those intrusions. I've also added 1/2 inch where I'm going to take this plastic and I'm going to break it back at an angle in order to keep this lower rim rigid, because there's nothing to hold this lower rim stiff. So hopefully this plastic broke back and going towards the inside of the cutout will keep it stiff. I'll have to clearance it over on either side because obviously there's got to be some interference on either side here. Also, I'll have to take this last little bit of plastic off the bottom so that this brake will be able to slide up under. This plastic right now is sitting directly on the top of the hood, so I have to give it a little bit of clearance to get it underneath there. Anyway, that's what I'm going to start out with, and I'm going to create a router jig for this to cut the hole out of the black 1/16 inch plastic. Okay, so I've laid this opening out, and it looks like it's just a rectangle, but it's not. It's pretty parallel. The lines are pretty parallel here and here, but this is the front of the opening, and this follows the curve of the power bulge, so it drifts down smaller over here. It's a very slight radius, but it's shorter on this end than there's a radius on top. This is a straight edge, of course, on the bottom. I'm using a particle board, a pretty dense particle board, as my router jig, because if you use a plywood or something, plywood sometimes has voids in it, and if you're using, like I'm going to be using, this is a guide wheel bit. It's used for cutting laminate tops, trimming out laminate tops. The wheel needs to ride across a pretty smooth surface in order to give you a good result as far as the hole's concerned, so that's why I picked this particle board. Okay, so this is the router guide, and this is the router bit that I used. It's just a small laminate trimming bit, and you can see the guide wheel here runs along the pattern underneath here, and then the trim portion of the bit here cuts the material away. You take a look at that way. You can see the cutting edges right there. Anyway, that you see that there's a taper in the front here when you look at it this way. Anyway, I use an oversized piece of material to start with to make sure that I'm able to clamp it well away from the tooling, and and then I'll basically cut everything, trim everything to the opening here. If you try to cut it with too small of a piece of material, you get chatter, and it doesn't work too well. So I just put some masking tape on the back side to make it a little more visible. It's kind of hard to lay it out on this black material. So I'm back engineering from the opening now. I want a 1/4 inch on the top side. I want a 1/4 inch on the bottom. After I bend it, this is the 1/2 inch flange that'll be on the bottom. Of course, I'll have to clear out these two ends where this little 2-inch intrusion is. So I'm going to trim that out right now and see how that goes. Okay, so this is what I come up with. This is the piece that's got to glue to the face here. This piece here. And that's approximately what it'll look like when it's done. I'll let it run wild on the top side, and I'll trim that off after it's all glued up. So now I got to clamp it up and get it nice and flat. Glue both components together, and hopefully combination of the two pieces put together with the epoxy, I'll have a nice flat piece. There's a little return edge on the bottom side to try and keep this stiff and straight. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so this is the final step, somewhat. I still have to trim it up, sand it up, and clean it up. So you can see the studs sticking out of the back now. I already have one of these already done, but this is the second one that's in process. And this stuff here, I got it at Home Depot. I've showed to you before. It's pretty good as far as sticking this ABS plastic together. It's really grabs it pretty good. I scuff it anyway. Scuff the back because the back of this ABS is a little slick, but it seems to work fine. Anyway, I'll show you what it looks like on the car. Okay, so this is what the piece looks like finished up, and it's got the beveled top now. Sanded that off so that they're both even, and it's got two studs sticking out of the back side, and that's how it all works together. I'll show it in the car next. So I got the hood up right now because I just bolted this piece on, and I just wanted you to see how it looks relative to the rest of the hood. This is a pretty good angle to get it at. And that's what it looks like in place. Now, being as it's plastic, if there's any buildup from the paint that doesn't allow me to get it in as tight, I can always just shave the ends off a little bit and go on from there. Anyway, that's the end of this week's struggle. And we'll move on to the next step after this. Thanks. I just thought I'd give you one last parting shot with the hood closed. I can't really tell the difference from this distance, but it seems to fit together. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching.